So I'm going to talk about one of my personal shitboxes. This is a 1985 Volvo 745. Found it in Delaware in a garage, hooked up to a battery tender. The ad said it was a Volvo with a V8 and a supercharger. How could I pass that up? It didn't idle on its own, so I did the logical thing and paid the cash asking price without doing a test drive and drove it home. That's where I got it. The car's red with a white hood from a 940 instead of a 740, so the hood doesn't line up correctly with the front of the car, and it doesn't have a hood latch, just the latch release, but it still stays down. It's got a Ford 5-liter V8 with a AOD transmission to back it up. It's got a pretty badass sound system and some nice speakers in the back. So, all in all, I think it was a steal. Supposedly, the history on it before I had it was that it was swapped with a Fox Body Mustang V8 in the late 90s or super early 2000s. I've got a dyno sheet from 2002, I think, with it making about 170 horsepower. Nothing amazing, but I think that's about what Fox Bodies were making to the wheels as well. So it's right there on par with those. There was tons of information that came with the car. There was like 5 different Volvo manuals, books on how to tune the motor, create math tables, correspondence with tuners for instructions on tuning, floppy disks, personal notes on air-fuel ratios, anything to be done to get the motor to run better or make more power. So it's just really cool to have just all this tons of information. And there's also a manual for B&M shift kit, so I'm assuming that was put in the car. And then 3 different supercharger manuals, because there wasn't one for the specific supercharger that came with the car, but there was, at least between those, enough information to get it in there. The car just must have been the previous owner's baby. He loved it, as far as I could tell. I mean, when I went to go pick it up, it was still hooked up to a battery. It was sitting in a garage, as opposed to everything else that was in the area was just outside, just kind of getting exposed to the elements. This thing was inside a garage, hooked up, and fired right up on the first try. So like that's just really cool. Everything else about the car seems like it was really taken care of as well. The paint job is this really nice red. It was repainted better than what I think the Volvo original color was. The car originally was red, but I think the paint on it was just like an improvement. It's got a little bit of flake in it. It looks really good. It's got a 12-inch JL sub in the back with a couple extra speakers and an amp, and like fancy RGB head unit from JBL. But it's just really cool, really well taken care of for those aspects. When I was talking to the seller, apparently 2 years before I bought it, he hit a deer going 70 miles an hour on the highway and messed up the front end. But instead of ditching the car, he just bought a Volvo 940 parts car and grafted the fender and the hood from that car onto this wagon and said, all right, cool, it's good to go again. Because he just didn't want to see it to go to a junkyard and be gone forever. So he just really loved his car. But I ended up picking it up because he said his health was failing and he needed the money for medical bills. It sucks, but hopefully I helped him out with that, and the car gets to keep living. So I think it's a win-win. I mean, overall, I love the thing. It's a definition of a shitbox, in my opinion. The interior is in rough shape, but with 45 years of use, it's kind of expected. Everything is kind of where it should be. The driver's seat's pretty torn up. It's got its rips and tears. The dash has more cracks in it than the San Andreas fault line, and the headliner has its share of cuts in it as well. The gas tank leaks somewhere out of the top of it when I fill up the tank all the way, and like I'll notice there's a little bit that came out from the bottom at the gas station, so that's always scary, but doesn't seem to affect anything so far. There's no AC in the car. There's no heat. All the parts are there for the AC, except for the condenser, which was removed, and now it's just sitting as one of the removed parts that I have. Just haven't installed it. Came with a supercharger. All the brackets were there for the supercharger. All the parts, everything is labeled. Well, somewhat, but I had all the parts in order to make this work. I didn't have to go buy anything other than a belt, which I didn't even need because I ended up finding a belt later as well in all the parts. This thing just came with so much stuff. I couldn't believe it. The supercharger was a Paxton VR4. It's using a SN93 as a base. Paxton isn't a company anymore. They got absorbed by Vortex Superchargers, but it's still pretty cool. There's still a couple, little bit of information out there for them. They still sell a couple of them. I think they're just getting rid of stuff that's in their inventory. But the VR4 is kind of special because it was like an upgrade that you could do to your supercharger if you had one of these SN series superchargers, and the SN93 was like the biggest of those type of superchargers, and then you did VR4 upgrade to that, and this is basically like a race spec supercharger. Like it, from what I remember seeing somewhere, like they're not supposed to be used for road use really, or there's off-road only. And they're not supposed to be run for a very long time either because they just get so hot. They need their own cooling system. They've got this dipstick oil cooler attached to a gigantic, like 14-inch trans cooler. So I hooked that up, stuck it to the bumper in the front of the car. But that just wasn't enough for cooling for the entire engine bay. The thing just runs so hot that it ended up melting the intake that I had on it. That had the MAF and the air filter, but the part that was connected to the supercharger, it just got so hot it started melting, and some of that plastic got sucked up in the supercharger, got sucked into the engine, and started creating really bad smoke. And on top of that, the engine just didn't like the supercharger. It was eaten up in the matter of a week. I went through a quart of oil as opposed to normally 2 or 3 months. I go through a quart of oil. So it was not happy with the supercharger at all. And then on top of that, if I tried to go wide open throttle past $4,000, it was just like wham! I hit a rev limiter at $4,000, and engine would just go to like 0 horsepower and stop accelerating. The reason for that is just the injectors, the stock fuel injectors, are not there to do it. So I'm pretty sure this is one of the older Fox body motors that has like 19-pound fuel injectors, so just not enough to be able to do anything other than naturally aspirate it. So I've got to get the engine ready for that if I actually wanted to run the supercharger. But I mean, that wasn't going to be a problem with it just whamming at $4,000. I would have just driven it nice and easy. But the whole thing of it running so hot that it was melting the intake was just, I couldn't deal with that. It was going to melt and eat through oil, and it was not going to be good. So until I can find a better solution for the engine bay to keep things cooler, I've got to be without the supercharger and probably get some better injectors. Probably a good idea. And then, of course, I've also been adding the Jag stickers from ordering parts and things just because, and that's at least 5 horsepower. So, I mean, even without the supercharger, I've got more horsepower now. The future for the plan of this thing is to get the engine in much better shape for the supercharger and go drag racing. I think that'll be super cool. I mean, I've got the recipe for disaster. I've got V8, supercharger, station wagon, leaks fuel. What more do you want? But I do want to get the interior fixed up, get the seats reupholstered, get rid of the ugly ass safety bumpers on the front. They got like this accordion style stuff on them so that it like absorbs some impact. I want to get rid of that, put something far less safe because looks are way more important than safety. In the end, this is just one of my shit boxes. I've got another one that I'll talk about as well at another time. But I want to hear about your shit boxes. Anything from like your sleeper car to a daily driver that's somehow on the road when it shouldn't be. So let me know in the comments. I want to read. It'll be super exciting to see what other shit boxes you guys have, and we compare and talk and hopefully learn from each other.